Welcome to our Friday webinar. The first thing actually that we wanted to do today is to do a little bit of what's new in DataGraph. And if you are a beta user, then we just uploaded a new version recently. And we are excited to show you this. So last week, if you were here, then you had heard me talk about the toolbar, that we were going to be doing some rearranging of the toolbar. And that is what I would like to demo for you right now. The beta version is already loaded onto my computer. So I'll just go ahead and open up a new file. And what I want you to notice is, go ahead and zoom in on it right here. Up in the toolbar, there are 3 new entries. If you are a beta user, you won't see these by default. I will show you how to add them. But when you click on these, you will get a menu that includes all of the DataGraph commands. If you are a longtime user, hopefully you're aware of the fact that the toolbar only contains a select group of commands that are ones we think are commonly used and just handy to have up in to access with a single click. But the full list of commands is under the command menu, and these are grouped according to the sort of generally what the commands do, where the first group are commands that are for graphing values and plotting data from the data table. This group here, starting with the pivot command, these are commands that analyze data as well as do graphing. And then there are commands down here which annotate, and that's what we're going to talk about for the most part today. And so what we've done is we've added these groups that allow you to access all of the commands in that general category by clicking on these and then getting a drop-down menu. So here you'll see all of the different annotation commands. Again, this is the topic of our webinar today. And for any of these, you have a button to add. You also have a direct link to our help documentation. So there's a question mark here for each one, and also a brief description of what that command does. This redesign of the toolbar was motivated by the latest operating system, where all of our toolbar icons got moved over to the side and were looking busier than they had when you had it used to be just the commands on one side and links to do things like the loop tool and those sorts of things on the other side. So I think this is a great addition. And also, I think for new users, this will be really nice because we don't have to tell you, make sure you go into the command menu to see everything. You'll be able to get quick access to all of the commands here, as well as quick access to the help menu. So let me show you how do you even get these added to your toolbar. Let me get to, here we go. So the way to do this is, well, first of all, if you are a registered user, meaning either you have purchased a license directly from us, or you are an App Store user where you've registered your copy, you do that under the preferences panel, because otherwise we don't know that you're a registered user if you purchase from the Mac App Store. So assuming that you're registered, you download the beta version, you open that up, and you won't see these yet once you install the beta. But what you do is go into the view menu and customize toolbar. You also can actually just do a control click on the toolbar itself, and that also gives you access to this customized toolbar option. And so actually, all the commands are shown here. Now, there is one visual glitch that we realized after we just uploaded this, that for some reason in this interface, the icons are shifted down. They shouldn't be doing this. But basically, any of the items that you see within this screen are things that you can drag them and put them on the toolbar if there's something you want yourself. So the pie command, for example, I can drag this icon if I'm going to be doing a lot of pie graphs and plop it right on the toolbar. So for those of you who want to try out these new toolbars, you would just click on this icon and drag and drop it into the your toolbar to show them there. And you can also remove things from the toolbar. So if you decide that, I don't know, I'm not doing any curve fitting anytime soon. Let's see, you should be able to click this and remove it. For some reason, let me reload this again because it seems like it's, there we go, view, customize toolbar. I can click on the icon from the toolbar and drag it, and then it disappears. So this allows you to remove things that you don't want there and add things that you would like to be there. And ultimately, you can then, have the toolbar be a little bit neater. For example, if histograms, if you don't use them very often, that's something that you can remove. And we will, continue to kind of use these menus for some other things as well. There are some other functionalities that I think should be in the toolbar that are not, or should be easier to access. So that's one of the things that we will do. And we're definitely, as always, interested in your feedback on this. And so anyway, so we'll go ahead and get started now talking about the annotation objects. But I think this is a really nice addition. So again, to add these into your toolbar, you're going to customize the toolbar. You'll see the groups, the annotate group, the graph group, and the analyze group, and you can click these and drag them into the toolbar. This is actually a functionality that that interface that you saw, that's not actually something that we had to design ourselves. That's something that's built into other programs as well. So it might not be just DataGraph that has that in terms of the programs you use, but it's something that I wasn't aware of actually until I started using it with DataGraph. Let's continue. So what we're going to talk about today is annotating graphs, and specifically, that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to get this toolbar and this functionality installed, so that you could see all of these annotation commands that we have within DataGraph. And I guess my second title for this webinar was labels versus legends, was kind of my working title, because when you're, starting out graphing, if you're using a spreadsheet, often the graphing templates that they have will automatically add legends for you. And certainly legend is one of the annotation commands that we have within DataGraph. But when you want to get a little more sophisticated with graphing, and I think really when I started hearing this advice was when I was giving a lot of presentations and taking some classes on improving your presentation skills. And in terms of the visuals for presentations, the advice was, don't put things in a legend if you don't have to. You're much better off actually labeling the data directly so that you can see what your eyes can make that connection better between the data and how you have it labeled. Okay, so I'll give a specific example, but I have heard this actually as a question for DataGraph. How come we don't automatically add legends into our graphs? And the reason, again, is that a legend can be really something that's overused. And if you are a student, you're starting out, you always see legends with the graphs that you make. Try and think of ways that you don't have to use a legend and be more creative. And that's hopefully what this webinar will help give you today, will be some ideas for adding annotations. So the first thing actually that I wanted to do before I get started with the example data set that I want to use to create some graphs is to give you some basic pieces of information that will really help you when you're trying to use the annotation commands within DataGraph. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that the graphing region itself within DataGraph really has two different coordinate systems. So what I outlined here is the standard XY coordinate system, but you can also think of the entire graphing region itself as having a coordinate system that allows you to place things within the overall figure. So let me demonstrate. And first, to do that, I'll go ahead and just make up some data. So I'm going to create an expression column. And if you've never noticed this before, on a lot of the entry boxes, we've been adding these triple dots right here. And this allows you to get a pop-up box that also has a slightly larger font, so it might be easier for you guys to see. So anyway, I'm going to make up some data. So I'm going to use a function to create some random numbers. We'll say just between 0 and 2. And I'm going to add that random number to the row number. Right? So that's just using the hashtag symbol. So if anyone wants to, if you want to follow along and do that, that's RAND with, in parentheses, I have a 0, 2. So that's the range of my random number. And I'm just adding a row number to that. Now it's going to ask me, well, how many rows do you need? Number of rows, because I'm generating data. So I'll just say 10. And now I have my random set of data, which are also going to be linearly increasing because I'm adding a row number to them. If you're new to the program, the row number, or you just haven't noticed this yet, the row number is the top entry in the list of all the data columns. That's always there. And you can actually change the symbol that's used for this, but I tend to just leave it as that. Okay, so here's my data. I'll just call this numbers, and we'll go ahead and just make a quick plot of this. Let me increase the point size a bit and also give a color. So if you're new, in case this was fast, all I did was click on my number column, and then I clicked the plot icon, and that, actually, I guess I clicked the points icon. We'll do the plot icon too. We can actually do both of them here and overlay those. So we have points, we have a plot, and our data is located based on the row number. So this is the x-axis, and then the values that I generated for this y-axis. So I can't click and move the data around. It is set within that XY coordinate system. But what if I add a text label? Actually, one of the things that I did before this webinar is I flipped through a few recent issues of Science Magazine and was trying to see what are the most common annotation techniques that people use. And there's all sorts of different ways that people annotate their data, but probably the most common one is just to add a text label. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, I can do that. If you download the beta, you'll be able to do that from here. But this also has the shortcut here for the text label. And the text command has a lot of ways to place text data. But one of the first decisions or options you have is whether or not the text is going to be placed inside the XY coordinate system. This is this option called where, and by default is set to inside, or do you want to place it somewhere else within the entire figure? And if you click on this menu here, you'll see there's all these different options. You can actually use this for creating titles if you don't like the way the default title is, X titles, Y titles, above, below. And if you pick figure, that will place it relative to the entire drawing region itself. So you can see I can drag this around. Actually, I can drag it outside of the figure, even if I have it set to inside, if you go back to that. But the big difference is, oops, here we go, is where you define the actual location requires a couple of other pieces of information. And one of them is the anchor point. The other one is an offset. And there's also aligning the text itself. So let's talk about the anchor point for a moment. This is where you anchor the location of whatever it is you're using. And a lot of different annotation type tools have anchor locations that sort of combined with the offset place that object or element within your graph. If I make my offset 0, 0, for example, then that's going to bring the text right to that location. That here is, again, where is it? It's inside my graph, and it's in the upper left corner. If I want to put this in the upper right corner, I can do that. But now my text justification is to the left. So actually it kind of goes out of the graph a little bit here. But the nice thing about this text object is that I can just interactively drag it around. So I can have it over here. I can change it to the upper left again, the lower left. I can change it to the lower right. You can also do directly in the center of the graph itself. Now, but notice when I pick anchoring in the center, right now it's not centered. Actually, I can make this text a little bit bigger in case this is hard to see. So we'll really make this larger, and maybe also, let me actually use the color picker to pick a, there we go. Blueberry is one of my highlight colors that I like. So, so now with this text, if I wanted it dead center, then what I need to do is take away this offset. The offsets are pixel offsets. So they're not, this is again, not the coordinate system in the XY coordinate plane where your data is located, but it's the second coordinate system that everything is in, which is where is it located in terms of pixels. If I put this as 0, 0, and I align my text in the center, now I have this text from this label in the exact point. Now, what do I want to say about it? So one of the things I guess that this gives you is it gives you a lot of control over where things are located. So if you really want to put something in the center, it's not just a matter of dragging and seeing, does it look like it's there? You can, bring it and place it exactly in that center point. The other thing is that with this level of control, you can change the aspect ratio of your graph and still have your text labels be in an appropriate place. For example, if I change this to be anchored in the upper left corner, again, it's the offset 0, it's centered. So you see how it's actually centered right on that line. I'm going to pull this back a little bit, and you can see how the offset changes. I could also just type in an offset. So maybe 20 by 20, for example, and then you'll see that there. I can change it to be left aligned. And now it's 20 away from that left corner. Now, if I move my graph, what happens is it stays aligned to that corner. If instead I had this starting in the upper right corner, right? And I looked at this text and I said, well, I don't want it to overlay my data. I'm going to place it over here in this corner. But then when I drag the graph, it is still anchored to this corner of the graph. And you can kind of tell because the offset is really quite large. The offset, says, what am I doing here? It says 644 by 20. When your offsets are really big, it probably means that your text has been dragged somewhere far away from where it's anchored. So as a general rule, keeping your offsets sort of small and then anchoring things close to where you want that text to be means that your graph will be much more flexible if you resize things. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense, and I'm not maybe harping on this too much, but I do think it's important to really understand fundamentally how these different things work, because offsets are everywhere throughout the program when you're using these various types of annotation tools, as well as labeling, using some of the built-in labeling commands. So this is a label that I can use to label my graph if I want to describe what's in this graph. But I can also annotate using the commands themselves. So for example, if I want to put labels around on each one of these points, I can do that by going into my command. Here, for example, I'm going into my plot command, and you'll see that there are labeling options here. There's actually, there's a whole section here all about the labels that are associated with this data that you can define. And you can, you can basically, what you can do is you select a column that you want to use as the basis for the labels for these points. And the labeling options differ slightly depending on what command you're using. But if I change this to, here's my number column, then you see how this is actually coming from the plot command. And I'll make maybe the points a little bit. Oh, there we go. Make them a little bigger, that they move out a little bit. And you can see how the way that it labels these, it's actually anywhere where there's a kink in the line, it places the label above or below that kink to avoid the overlapping the line itself. So the plot command, again, is very designed for this sort of a graph here, and in terms of the labels. So for example, if I change my random seed and move this random number around, you're going to see the label locations change relative to the line to avoid overlapping the line. Okay, so what I wanted to do is to work with the data set that was used to create this graphic. This is a data on moose and wolf abundance. It's, I believe, one of, if not the longest running studies of population dynamics of wildlife. And it's sort of an interesting data set because you can read about this more. I won't go into too much detail, but you can basically see how the moose population, this is on an island, so they're isolated. And then in 1980, there was a canine parvovirus that was introduced into the island, and the wolf abundance went down significantly. And then you can see the corresponding impact on the moose population increasing after that. And there's more to the data in terms of the dynamics, but let's go ahead and download this data, and I'll walk you through that. So if you want to follow along and work with this data with me, that would be great. I will give you the link. Here's the actual website where you can get this data. I will put this link in the chat. There we go. Okay, and let's see, and I'm going to, oh, this is actually, here we go. So, okay, get myself oriented here. So the technical, here we go. So go to that website, and then you'll go under the drop-down menu for technical. And from there, you can see data and interpretation. And from here, you'll see how there is a download button here, wolf moose data, that we can download. I'm going to click that. It shouldn't take too long. Maybe if a bunch of us are doing it, we'll slow things down. Let's see, maybe we shouldn't all be doing this. Here we go. I think I already had it downloaded from before. Yeah, here's the file. So I will go ahead and use this. This is an Excel file. And I just, if you click this download button here, you can see the file that you've downloaded. And then one way to do this is just to say, show in Finder. And here's this now Excel file. And if you right click on an Excel file and go to open with, you will see DataGraph as one of your options. And I hope that this opens the beta version that I'm using right now. There we go. Yeah. So here's the data that was in that file, all imported. There's just a little bit of data manipulation that we need to do here. This file actually includes a lot more data than we really need to look at. So I'm going to go ahead and hide from view everything but this first group of data. This is what contains the population dynamics. And I think I'll move this aside a bit so we can really see this, all this data. So within this group, expand that, you actually, what you see is that the top row contains the column headers. And although this is all in one spreadsheet in Excel, so it doesn't have it grouped into further subgroups. For our purposes, that is what we would want to do. We would want to actually have the Moose data, for example. We could highlight these objects and place that in a group, do the same for the climate data. So you see how there's the first column in each of these has a title just in that column, the way that it was imported. And the same thing for wolves. We can highlight all of those and group. So I'm just clicking and dragging, highlighting these groups of columns in order to create groups for each of these different sets of data. And that when you have that, then we can actually, what I did was just put this here. And actually, we're not using all this data, so maybe I'm doing more overkill than I need to here, but just to show you how I organize this. And I will post a file of this on the online examples after the webinar. So anyway, so here's now across all, so all this data now is at least it's grouped into the set of data as it's organized originally within this spreadsheet. And what I want to do here is take this first row and make that all my column headings. And I can do that very quickly across all of these columns by highlighting the row. I can right click and I will say use row for column titles. And then I can go ahead and just click on that row and delete it. And when you do that, it is going to ask you to confirm, are you deleting all the columns? Are you deleting only the ones that I'm seeing, or only the columns in the group highlighted on the left? And you'll see on the left-hand side on this interface, it's giving you a visual of all of the data within this file. I can just say, actually, it's just, I think these would do the same thing, only visible or only group. I'll just say only visible. And then it just deleted that row. So I don't know. Anyway, I sort of like to show how easy it is to do some of these manipulations, but we really don't need all that data for this. What you need is just the year and the wolves and the moose. So I will go ahead and actually hide, let's see, these other groups. But now if you want to explore this data, you see how to organize it. And again, there's a lot more data that's in this file. But if we wanted to do a plot of this where year is going to be the x-axis, and I want two line plots, one with wolves, one with moose, then I'll click the plot command once. That plots one set of data. I'll click it again to get the second set of data. These are very different scales. So you'll notice that the graph that I showed you that we're mimicking actually is using a split and joined axis. To do this, I will click on the split Y button, that creates my split axis. I'll move the moose data to the top axis. And then in the menu that you see here, stack X and Y, I can change this to join that on the same axis. So I've now joined the Y axis for these two graphs to be overlain on each other. And then we can change some aspects of this so that these don't look exactly the same. So we have points and triangles. The way that the sizing works, sometimes the triangles look a little small. So I'll kind of put a factor in front of the point size to even these out a little bit. And anyway, so there we have the data. And I realize that I'm running a little bit behind where I wanted to be. So now that we have this, let's talk about how would we annotate this graph. And the first thing that we might want to do is to try or to show you, what I want to show you is just if we add a legend. Now, again, I said that you don't necessarily want to always add a legend, but if we did, we would click on the legend command, and the legend command checks to see what other things are being drawn, what other commands are there, and it will label them according to the name of the column title by default. Now you can change the names here, and it will also change there. So if I wanted this to be capital, for example, I can change it there, and it will change. It's connected via what we refer to as a token. If you want to customize these, you can actually do it directly from the legend. You can double click, and what you see is this text entry box that shows you this blue token that actually is what connects it over here to the titles. Anyway, just in case if you've never seen that before, you can just highlight, delete it, and type in what you would like it to be. But let's see, the other thing that I wanted to do here was to show you, well, what are the ways that we could not use a legend if we wanted to just label these instead. And so what I'm going to do is not change where this legend is. I'm going to go ahead and just make a new graph. So I'll come over here to the thumbnail, and I'm going to click on this button here on the left-hand side of the thumbnail that allows me to clone this, and then we'll create another graph. So this is the one with my legend. And now this one, I want to use labels. And first of all, before I actually use even the label command itself, there is an interesting option that's within the plot commands. Before I show you this, let me just rearrange my user interface a little bit. I'm going to close the definitions over here. And I also am going to swap the data in the commands by clicking this button down here. And then that gives me a lot more room to show this to you. So now I have that open. I can expand these commands up. That was another thing. If you haven't done this before, you can use once you have commands highlighted, you can use the arrows on your keyboard to open and close. It's very handy. So now I have both of these open. And notice that down here at the bottom of the commands, this is where the text box is located that you can access directly by double clicking here, but you can also expand the commands, and this is the actual text box of where the legend name is. But notice just to the right of that I can say, I want this instead of in the legend, I can put this at the end of my line. And so this is a very handy option. Now, when you do that, it automatically removes those from the legend. So now the legend doesn't even show up on this graph because of the fact that I've added those there. And the other thing I wanted to do was to change the color of the label from using the default color to using line color 1 for the moose. So you can do that there to keep the color coordinated with your data. So this for example, this is line color 1 is what's being used here. So I set my text also to line color 1. Then if I change what line color 1 is in the style settings, that also they'll both get updated to the same. Okay, so that's one thing. So that I think is a very handy thing to realize. If you have multiple lines on a graph, you can just change it so that the legend name just automatically gets to the end of the line, so you don't have to do any other formatting. Another thing that I wanted to show you is actually using the lines command to note a particular point in time. So here for this data, 1980 was a critical point because of the fact that it is where the when the canine parvovirus was introduced to this location. So if I click on the lines command, so let me undo that so you can clearly see what I'm doing here. So this is technically not, again, one of the annotation commands, but a lot of the commands have different, ways that you can use them and have labeling options. So I'm using this lines command. So if I click on that, it creates this command in the list. And what the lines command allows you to do is to have a line drawn at a particular X and Y point. You can also use data columns to define multiple lines, but here I'm just going to say 1980. So by default, it was 0, which is why my axis range changed with that. But if I want to have this line at 1980, I can change the line style if I want it to be slightly different, or a dashed line, for example. But what I want to show you here is that if I open this up, then this also has a label or legend name. Now, the label from this, actually, this is one thing that I'd like to add, that to have the label so I can just specify what it is, the way you can some other commands. But if I here say this is where the virus was introduced, there we go, then what I just did is I actually added this to the legend. So this is just kind of the opposite of what I did with the lines, right? I can go into here and actually, for something like this, for a dashed line, you'll probably want to make your legend size a little bit wider. So I can do that here, where I change it from standard to wide. Now you can see the dashes for that. And again, I can change the anchoring for the legend. We can put this into the upper left. Now, I was showing you how to do labels, so maybe that seems a little strange that I just showed you how to add this to the legend, but I think this is kind of interesting to have this combination. And the other thing that I can do here is, if you remember, we added this functionality, but that now that I've added this command, I can reuse it in my other graph. So I'm going to take this command and I'm going to drag it and drop it on the thumbnail of the graph that I started with. And now the same line is here and it got added into this legend, where again, probably want to make this a wide format so that we can see that and move it to the upper left so it doesn't overlap the data. So I think that's kind of a useful thing to realize, that the lines command can be added into the legend. Now, these we remove from the legend, and I'm going to go ahead and actually, one way to remove this from the legend, well, I can just delete the legend. That's certainly one way. And then to use a label. So we haven't used yet the label command, which is different than the text label, in that the text label really has, again, it has an anchoring point and this offset that you can add, whereas the text label is defined more in terms of an XY location. So when you want to pinpoint and label an exact place, then use the label command. So I added one in here. Again, this is very interactive. I can drag this around and move the label. I can change it to be horizontal. And the label command is really nice because it's designed to recognize common things that you want to do. So it doesn't just rotate 100% freely, it snaps automatically into, again, horizontal or vertical positions, because that's such a common thing that we would want to do. And it will also snap to your data. So it'll snap here right to this line, and then it will be exactly at that point. This is another one where I can double click on this text to edit it. I don't have to go into the command menu to do that. And since I already have this text here, I'll just copy, go back to here and double click and paste that in. Okay. So that's the basics of the label command. Now this also has this option for where are you positioning the label. Is it going to be inside the graph, or is it going to be somewhere else? Because you can position it anywhere relative to the entire figure. For example, one common technique I've seen is to have an arrow labeled, actually not on the x-axis, so that's one way to do it, but to label above the graph. Now, this is a command that, and actually we probably should have the graph expand in terms of adding more margin above, but you'll find that with some of the annotation commands that the figure itself won't necessarily always have the margins expand for the annotation commands the way it does for the data. But so in this case, you probably can't really see this, but there's a little arrow right there where it got pegged above my graph. So I need to pad the automatic setting that's there for my margin above. And I can do that in my canvas, where here's my margin setting and here's the margin above. And I can type in, for example, maybe 50 pixels will work. And also, an important thing to realize is that any of these pixel offsets anywhere in the program can also be entered as units of measure. So if I really wanted my margin above to be 1 centimeter, I can type that in. Now that's not enough, so I guess it needs to be 2 centimeters. I can type in exactly what that margin to be. Now, right now, I don't even have the graph in exact measurement. So if I'm going to do that, I might as well go ahead and change the size of my graph itself to be something specific. And again, I could do this in pixels, or I could do this in units of measure, but maybe I want this to be, 6 inches by, I don't know, 4 inches or something like that. Anyway, you have a lot of control over the sizes of not only the graph itself, but every element that you add. Again, you can also be in units of measure. And I feel like, unfortunately, I'm definitely running out of time. I got a little bit off balance with my technical problems that I had. But if you can stick around a little bit, let me just introduce you to these other annotation commands so that you can see some of the other things that we can do with them. And what I wanted to do was show you focus on the ones that are just at the top here, that are again, sort of unique for annotating and give you some unique options. So I want to show you the bracket command, the region command, and the range commands. So let me do a quick demo of each of those. And first I will, again, clone this graph so that we'll start with a whole new graph. And we'll add the bracket command. So if we go under here, I can add a bracket. And then when you click away from that menu, it will close. Now the bracket command, when it's inside the XY range or XY coordinate system, it has a lot of flexibility to allow you to drag it around. Now, if you click on the edges, let me actually make this line thickness much, much thicker so that you can see this bracket. So I can click on the edges and go out and up and down and bring this back and forth, changing the top and the bottom. But if you want to also just peg exactly where the bracket is set, again, we have all of these different options. or you have an entry box where you can enter what you want this to be. And this will have both an offset as well as an XY location. So the other thing that I wanted to do was actually on this is I didn't want it to be the horizontal setting. I actually want to put it above the graph itself. So either of these settings, horizontal or vertical, that's within the XY coordinate system, but I can place it above my graph. And now my options are slightly different. I have now a bit more control here with, I can use a slider to change this. And if I move this around, then I can change the left and right extent of my bracket, but both ends will always be right, the same distance, I guess is the way to say it. So I can change the offset here. I can also change this to a curly bracket. If my offset's 0, it's going to go into my graph, but I want it to actually be maybe a little bit positive. And then I can just type in, this is before the virus. And in this case now, I don't want this label command here anymore. I'll just go ahead and delete that to remove it from this graph. But now that I've created one of these bracket commands and have the settings that I like for it, I can take this command and I can do an edit, copy, and edit, paste, or Command C, Command V. Now I have 2 of these, and I can click this one and drag it. There we go. And I can then have this be after. Okay, so that was just a quick demo of how the bracket command works. Let's go to let's do another one. Again, I'll just go ahead and clone this to start a new command. So in our list here, after bracket is region. And so we'll go ahead and I'll add a region command. The region command, similar to these other annotation commands, actually, maybe I'll just leave those in there, allows you to highlight regions within the XY coordinate system. But it's sort of special in that it's different than if you brought this graph into PowerPoint and you wanted to add a circle or a square over some area, because the way that this command is designed, or the way that it works, is that when I change my, let me change my graph to automatic so you can see this. If I change my size of my graph and change the aspect ratio, notice that the region, again, I'll make this thicker so you can see this, that if there's a point within this region, when I change my scaling, that does not change. So it's different than just drawing a circle over your graph. It's really drawing it over the data, so that if you want to select a particular set of data, let me go ahead and hide this line. So for example, say I want to highlight, oops, that is one thing that does happen. If you click and drag, that's where you'll zoom in on a region. If you want to undo that, you can just highlight over here and then uncrop. But here we go. So I can click and drag up, and click and drag this down, maybe a little bit to the side. So you have to kind of find the edges to do this interactively. You can also type in, again, the minimum X and Y, minimum X region, or the X region, I guess is maybe the better way to put it, the Y region. And when you do that, it is, again, it's always going to encapsulate those points within that region. And if I change my graph, it's not going to, the shape will change to make sure that the same points are always within that zone. So it's really meant to be very data friendly, if that makes sense. Now I can add a fill into the region. for example, might be nice just to add, oh, let me do this with the color picker so that I can add some shading like that. And one thing that is good to realize is that when you create these, I'm thinking of suggesting that we actually have an opaque fill on these regions to begin with, because then that allows you to click and drag it around once it has a fill. If there's no fill, you can't actually click and drag the regions unless you're clicking the edges. So oftentimes I find myself adding fills into these just so I can click and drag them, but I'm maybe I don't really want a fill long term. In any case, this region also, or this command also has a labeling option. So I can say, loss due to virus, for example, and by default, it's positioned at the top. I could change this to, actually I sort of like it positioned at the top, but again, I might want to have a slight offset, and you'll notice just to the right of where you set the position, here's, 0,0, that means the offset is 0, and I could change this to 5,5, and that just moves that a little bit. Or maybe I only want it offset a little bit in the Y direction, in which case I would have that be 0,5. So again, I have a lot of control over where that is. One handy thing to realize for any of these label boxes that only have one line, then I can do a /n, and that will give me 2 lines. So let me actually just move this over maybe quite a bit, just so you can see. Oops. So it does have to have the comma, and right, yeah, 20 and negative 20. There we go. So now you see I do have to, kind of, I'm fooling with this a little bit here to get this where I want it to be, but there you go. So now it's in the right spot, and it will stay in that spot. So if I move things around, it's pinned to this region that I have set up, and it's going to be maintained there, even if I change my, change my data, or change my aspect ratio, or change my, let's see, what did I do here? Oh, I unzoomed the wolves, but I didn't unzoom the moose. There we go. So now you can see both of that. So the last command that I wanted to talk about is the range command. And we'll go ahead and do that. Oops, actually, we'll clone this graph. So the range command allows you to highlight particular blocks within either on an X scale or a Y scale. And if I add this command, oops, sorry, the toolbar from Zoom pops up sometimes and covers what I'm trying to do. So again, we'll go to this annotate, we'll add the range command, and I'll just go ahead and delete the command that's there. Now, one thing I guess that I do all the time is I group my commands that are similar. So if I want to keep these bracket commands around, I can highlight these, use my group icon here to place these in a group. This is my brackets. I can minimize that to give me more room. And then if I really just don't even want to see them, I can just hide them for now. So what happened though with my graph? Well, I added the range command, and its minimum and maximum are set to 0 and 1. So that's way down here. So it's kind of, affecting my range of my graph. Now, for a lot of these commands that you can use to annotate, you can actually, there's several of them have a built-in exclude from range button. If I click that, now my graph looks like it did before, because it's not using this as part of the data range. Anyway, I can change this so that now it goes up to 1980. So I can just put in what I want that range to be, and now I have that highlighted region. I would want to place this high in the list or above where my plots are so that it was drawn below the actual lines. And then I can do another range command for the other side with a different color. So I can, again, we'll just, so that you can see what I'm doing. I just selected it, copy, paste. So now I have a copy, but instead of this going from 0 to 1980, I want this to go from 1980 and I want it to go out. Now, a really handy trick with this is rather than me having to kind of eyeball it and see, well, how far does my my X range go? You can just type in infinity, INF, or the infinity symbol, and then it's going to expand to the end of the graph. So you don't even have to think about it. So the other thing here would be then if I would definitely want to change the color. So I'll just click on this and make this a different color. And now I have my two, yeah, maybe that's a better shaded region. Anyway, so now I have my two regions, and the region commands can also be data driven. I could go into this and I can, you see where I have the X and the Y, you can actually pick columns from your data table to define the regions. So you can have multiple regions of different type. And you can do the same with the Y range. There's a lot of flexibility. They can have built-in options for date columns if you want to alternate by some date increment or time increment. So this is a command that's definitely worth spending a little bit of time to understand if you want to create overlays like this. Does anyone have any questions? So can you talk about the X-axis specifications? I often have trouble with the ranges. I think I understand what you're talking about, because DataGraph does take a sort of a different approach to setting the range of the axis range, of the X and Y axis ranges. But again, it's different than what you may be used to. But once you get your head around it, it's really has a lot of benefits to using this approach. So yes, I'll talk about that for a moment. So the issue is, and if I'm missing the mark on answering your question, let me know. But I think what you're getting at is, what if I want to change this axis range? Right now, I have this graph that goes from automatically, it's picking from 1950 to way up here, beyond 2020. But I maybe don't want to go out that far here, say on the x-axis. So if you want to change that, first of all, these settings are in the axis settings, if that makes sense. Axis range is in the axis settings. And this is the object that's over here on the in our list. And I can go ahead and expand this out. And these settings that are just below the titles are the ones that we want to use to control what range we have for our axis. And I'll say right away, before I guess getting into the detail, the benefit of this approach is that it allows you to create graphs and templates that still respond to changing data. And that's one of the things that was motivated this type of approach. Because if you're used to just having a lot of programs, like programming languages, for example, there'll be an option for, set the minimum, set the maximum X and Y, but then that is totally inflexible to what your actual data is, or if your data changes. So in any case, so the settings here are include, padding, and restrict. So first of all, the restrict setting is probably the closest to what you might be used to, because if I say I want my maximum to only go to 2020, then I can type in my X goes to 2020, and it's just restricted that range. Now, this is actually the same as, notice now when I put my mouse down below, there's this highlight bar, because this is the same as me just clicking and zooming. This will actually change this restrict range if I go ahead and do that. So that may not even be the best way to restrict it, because again, if I just click and drag, it just changed the setting, because it is meant to be flexible, allow you to kind of have this overbar that you can move around in your data. And if you want to expand back to the full range, you uncrop with that. So instead, look at the other two settings, the include setting and the padding setting. The padding is actually the setting that determines how much space there is from the end of the data to the actual end of the axis. If I change the padding, let me get rid of my box here so you can see what the menu options are. If I change padding for X to none, automatically my data range is going to begin and end with whatever data is there. And you can see how that's exactly what happened. And nicely, the labels that I had here on my, at the end of my lines shifted to accommodate the fact that the padding was set to 0, and now the end of the graph is the end of the data. So often that's really what you want to do. And this is nice because then if I added new data, for example, I know the first time I made these graphs, that was some years ago. And so we didn't have data further out. So I could just keep pasting new data into this table, and then it's going to expand out when I have new values. The other way that we can control things is using the include in X. So for example, basically what include means is you're telling it, I want you to treat this number as though it were data. So if I said, I want to include 2020, then 2020 is now part of the data range for the X data. And that's why now it's going out to 2020 and it's stopping right at that value. So this allows you to kind of make, have some fine adjustment for where you go, but because the padding is set to none, it's going to be right at that value. And it isn't unless I add the restrict value that it will change, will limit where the x-axis can go to. If I put the restrict value now to 2050 though, notice it doesn't do anything because there's no data out there anyway. It doesn't go out to the restrict value. It only won't go beyond it if the data doesn't go beyond it. So I hope that helps. How it's really these three things. And I personally find adjusting the padding is often what makes the most sense in terms of changing things. So if I want, for example, here, let's just get rid of that include. If I want to have less space than what the automatic setting was giving me, or what we call the nice setting, I can just change this to 5%, for example, and that will give a little bit of padding on either side. But it's then consistent on either side. So same thing with the 10%, is doing the same padding on both sides. The nice value will actually take into consideration the data values, and sometimes will pin the way that you might not want it. And yet I find the padding 5 and 10% are often what I need to do. Oh, also good. Okay, so it sounds like this was exactly what you were interested in learning about. Another thing that's really kind of nice to know is that if you let's see, control click, or is it command click? Sometimes I forget, or double click. There we go. Sorry, it's a double click on the axis will give you this menu, and you can get this for either the X or the Y axis. So notice I put my mouse on the axis, I double clicked, it brings this up, and these boxes are the include, the padding, and the restrict setting. So you can access these directly from the axis itself. So if I want to change my Y to have 0 padding, I can change that there to none. That's a really handy thing too, to realize that you can change that. I have to be honest, I sometimes I just by default go into the access settings myself, but just double click and bring this up, and then you can change that there. Add in include numbers. Oh, and you can add in more than one. So if for some reason you wanted to include 1920 and 2050, you can put a comma separated list and add in as many values as you wanted to see. So anyway, we'll just undo that. Okay, let me look at, see what other question was here. Let's see. Okay, I think I got that. Oh, can you repeat how you assigned the second y-axis? Yes, absolutely. Let's just do that really quickly. So I have my data that I can plot. I have one x-axis and two y's. I'm going to click plot command twice. So that creates both of these commands, and the settings are on the canvas itself. So this is where I have the split X and split Y. So the first thing I do is click split Y. So you really have to create the second axis in order to do this. And you can have a whole bunch of them that you could do. And then when you do that, you get this other menu, stack X and Y. I almost think these should really be flipped, because it's you almost expect that the menus to pop below when you click something new. But in any case, this menu only shows when you have a split axis, and you have then these options for, now that you have two different axes, how are you going to make them? How are you going to or do you want to stack them on top of each other, or do you want to join them? And I'm going to say join. Now, this didn't really change anything for me yet, because I actually still have these two plots on the same axis. So all I have to do is move one to the different axis according to these selector boxes here on the left, and then that creates the split axis for me. And I guess another handy thing just to realize is, I know the first time I did this, it did feel a little bit magical, but it really isn't. I can switch back and forth. It's all based on what settings you have. If you want it to be stacked, you can change it back to stacked. If you want it to be joined, you can change it back to joined. It will remember, where your commands were located. If you don't want the split axis to even be there at all anymore, you can click this object, because this is what got added when I did the split axis. And I can just click this and hit the delete key. And now I'm back to the beginning. The split is gone, and I no longer have the join axis. So I'll just undo that. But and when you do a bunch of split axes, again, it adds all these different elements. You can see other places where you can place things. And now that I have a whole bunch of them, you can actually easily create one of these graphs where you have multiple lines and multiple y-axes represented on the left-hand side. So I think that's pretty cool. But again, if you decide you don't want all these, you can just highlight these like other objects, hit the delete key, and then I'm back to where I was. I just need to move these to two different axes to have them get that look. Okay, so hopefully that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I know that's a function that's there are, if you're wanting to see more on that, actually, this is a good place to maybe also promote what's in the help menu. So there's little question marks on this when you create a split axis. This will bring you directly to the help article for the split y-axis. So this shows you some examples, and also in the layout settings, there's a section for the split x-axis. They kind of work the same, but just so you can see two different articles here. And they can also, you can overlay, you can have split X and Y. X-axis issue. So one, and now this will be the final question that I'll do for today. Dates have given me trouble. I just wanted the hour in a month, day, year, hour, minute, second, date format to be on the X-axis, and I ended up with scientific notation of the number behind the date. I created a function with the hour field and use that on the X-axis, and then I have to convert it to a number. What is the better way? So the question has to do with how dates show up numerically on your X-axis. And I guess what I can tell you is if you're having trouble where you have a date column, and first of all, just to be clear, let me open up the column definitions again, and let's just add a, oh, actually, no, let's do this in the other file that I had, because I already have some numbers here. So here, for example, if I want to add some dates, oh, let me not do this with a number column. I'll go ahead and click this guy here, add a date field. So this will be my date, and we'll put, I don't know, 2020 01. Now that form, since I created it before I added the data, so it already had the months /day/year format. So anyway, I just need to change the format so that it can read this correctly. And if you ever type in dates and it's showing up as red because the format it's set to doesn't match the data, one handy thing to realize is that if you go under the gear menu, you can click that and get a list of suggested formats. So this says date formats that work, select which one you want to pick. So I'm using well, these are sort of actually the same thing, the DataGraph built-in format, which is year, month, day. Now, if you, and I'll just put in a couple of these and then change the day. So different commands handle dates better. Some commands handle dates better than others, I think is what I'm trying to say. So if I'm going to clone this plot, and I'll change this from using the row number to using the date that I typed in as the X-axis. Oh, and notice, by the way, how my text label stayed right where it is. Again, since it's not located in XY coordinates, that text label is pinned to a graph location. So just thought that was a nice thing to notice. Anyway, so in this case, I have an axis that is, it recognizes the date axis and it's plotting it. It may not be formatted exactly the way you would want it, but it's not just showing the numbers. Dates in DataGraph use a standard of the underlying number is seconds since 1970. So if you, for example, instead of, I'm trying to think of a command that doesn't use, I don't know if you remember what command you were using, but the date axis, what's one that maybe doesn't work with? No, lines work with dates. I think maybe the box command maybe doesn't work well with dates. That might be one that doesn't really have, let's see, if I'm just going to repeat these same dates, and then we'll create a box plot with our numbers, and then put the position as the date column. Yeah, so this is an example that this is a command that does not have a built-in date functionality. So it's sort of interesting actually when you plot dates with a box plot. It will, it has the width set to, a small number, and then the end result is you actually can't see them, because since the x-axis is really, dates are numbers, but they are these guys here. They're very big. So you can see this is 1.5 times 10 to the 9th. That's approximately how many seconds since 1970. So anyway, so when you change the width here, you have to make it a very big number in order to have it show up. So it's possible, it's not like it's impossible to plot dates. You just have to be aware of what will happen. But yeah, the x-axis itself is not in a format that you would really like to see. You'd rather have it be an actual date. So one way, I'm trying to, actually, we'll just try this and see if this works. If I plot this data via points, but I'm going to hide the points command because that's not actually what I'm trying to do, although that's sort of interesting just to see that. You can't overlay that. Now that I have a command within my list that understands dates, it is showing me a proper date axis. So it's interpreting the data correctly. Now, I think one of the question here is, can you just pull the day part out of the x-axis? And I think maybe what you've been doing is sort of the way that you would do it, which is to use a function to pull out that information to show it. So this is something, we've been thinking about how to maybe make the date, a proper date axis, more flexible. But if you just wanted to have, let's see, what would you do here? So if you wanted what day of the week this is, for example, then one way to do that would be, let's see if I can do this off the top of my head, would be to, instead of displaying the entered value, would be to display, actually, let's not do day of the week because I can't, that's not built in. If you go to the help document here, I think that gives you a link to the ICU page on the web that has all the different format strings that you can use here, and you can customize this to do all sorts of things. But anyway, we have month day built in. So say you wanted the axis to show as month day. Notice changing it here did not change my axis. It still is interpreting it as a date axis. But one thing that you can do is you can use a text expression column, because what you really want is to convert this actually to text rather than being interpreted as a date. And so I added that text expression column, and I'm going to use my date field. And now this is actually the same, it's using the label now as text. And instead of having my position as date, I could use my text column. And then, oh, now my points are still here, so let's exclude those. And and my width is super wide because I changed my width to accommodate the dates. So let me make this, there we go. Now that looks much better. And if I did this to start with, again, I can just create a new box plot, highlight these two columns, highlight my two columns, click on box, and then I would have my text label. So I don't know if that works for your particular case, but that is one technique that I've used to take dates and to have just the category. Okay, you think that would do it? Okay, great. And if, we have trouble, maybe send us the file if you, or post an image on the forum, and we can see if we can help you with that. But the text expression is a handy tool to have in order to take something that you formatted within the data table, and maybe it's formatted the right way, but you just want to see it as text. So anyway, thanks so much, everyone. I hopefully won't have any problems with the next time, and appreciate you all being here, and hope that everyone has a wonderful weekend.